Meanwhile, Israel has released a video showing its army delivering aid to Al-Shifa Hospital following today's raid.
The Israeli government claims that a Hamas command center is operating in tunnels beneath the hospital. Hamas has denied that.
محاولة نتنياهو وجيشه المهزوم تصوير توغل دباباتهم واقتحام جيشه المهزوم مستشفى الشفاء كأنه إنجاز مراهقة سياسية ومسرحية مكشوفة لن تنطلي على أحد ولن يصدقها أحد. فالشفاء مستشفى عمره أكبر من عمر الاحتلال، وهو يأوي مرضى ومصابين وأطباء وممرضين كما يأوي نازحين من الأطفال والنساء وكبار السن. ووصول دبابات الاحتلال إلى الشفاء ليس إنجازا، فالشفاء مرفق مدني طبي وليس ثكنة عسكرية، ومحاولة نتنياهو وجيشه تصوير ذلك كإنجاز أو انتصار يعبر عن الفشل والارتباك وعمق الهزيمة التي تكبدوها.
Let's talk more about the situation at the Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza. Bring in Human Rights Watch Special Advisor on Health, Kayum Ahmed. A very good evening to you, Kayum. Good to have your time. So, Israel overnight announcing that it was launching what it says was a precise and targeted operation against Hamas at the Al-Shifa Hospital. But just how precise and targeted has it been, really?
So one of the important things to recognize is that hospitals and other medical facilities are regarded as civilian objects that have special protections under international humanitarian law or the laws of war. And hospitals only lose their protection from attack if they are being used to commit acts harmful to the enemy and after a required warning. And at Human Rights Watch, we are in the process of currently looking at the evidence that's been developed and sent through by the Israeli Defense Forces. Thus far, we have not found any evidence supporting attacks on hospitals or supporting the loss of the protections under international humanitarian law for these hospitals, including Al-Shifa Hospital.
And the Israeli military has said that even post the storming of the building, if you will, this morning, they said that they've uncovered unspecified weapons and terror infrastructure beneath the Al-Shifa Hospital. You are among organizations that are not convinced that enough has been put forward by the Israelis to support that claim. What would be the most convincing evidence, and is there evidence at all that would still justify military boots inside the hospital, even if they are claiming that no patients or staff were harmed?
There are specific cases that have been offered and examples offered by the international humanitarian law frameworks, which give examples of a gunman, for instance, on top of the roof of a hospital. That gunman can certainly be attacked by a military force if they are shooting at the military. But to then destroy the entire hospital, to bomb the entire hospital, is what we would regard as disproportionate and excessive force compared to what's actually at play. And so the evidence that we would want to evaluate is to verify that the tunnels which the Israeli Defense Force claims to be under the hospital are in fact there, and also whether those tunnels are being utilized for military purposes. And that evidence seems to be lacking for the time being. It's also important to note that Israel has made some fairly blanket statements about the use of hospitals by Hamas, which we must put into context, because there are 36 hospitals in Gaza. They have provided some alleged evidence around 3 or 4 hospitals, but seem to be attacking a range of hospitals beyond the numbers that they've indicated. Secondly, the World Health Organization has also documented attacks on healthcare in the West Bank, which is not controlled by Hamas. And so even the arguments being made by the Israeli Defense Force must be reviewed very, very carefully and systematically in order to make the assertions that they are making about hospitals losing those protections. Those protections can only be lost under very, very specific circumstances in international human rights law.
And among those exceptions which may be granted, am I right to say, would be the issue of a proportionate response. At this point, there's not been much of reporting around extreme violence targeting, let's say, the patients and medical staff within Al-Shifa, but overall, there has been a question about whether the Israeli response has been proportionate. 1,200 people killed when Hamas attacked the country on October 7th, over 11,000 Palestinians now killed by the Israeli military. Overall, where would a war crimes investigation even begin when you look at just the sheer scale of the destruction?
Human Rights Watch has taken a very clear position that all of these attacks on hospitals must be investigated as war crimes. And the question you raise about proportionality, I think, is a critically important one. I've been on calls with healthcare professionals and medical doctors in Gaza over the last couple of weeks. In fact, just spoke to a medical doctor in Gaza yesterday who described the horrific attacks on hospitals, but also the implications of the blockade, the total blockade of Gaza. There is no access to water, no decent sanitation, fuel or electricity. Food and medicine is now being rationed. And so the situation has reached catastrophic levels, and the healthcare system has been completely decimated. So there's clearly an indication that Israel's attacks have been utterly disproportionate and therefore must be investigated as war crimes, as well as crimes that violate international humanitarian law.
What should Hamas, it's an armed group, yes, but at some point it was the elected authority within Gaza, what should it be doing at this point to better protect, or try at least, to make sure that civilians are better protected, if at all possible, because Israel is saying it's hitting civilian targets such as hospitals because Hamas is operating from within compounds at Al-Shifa, etc.
If Hamas is in fact utilizing hospitals to conduct military operations that are attacks on the enemy, the Human Rights Watch has made it very clear that that utilization of hospitals also amounts to a violation of international humanitarian law and must cease immediately. Although the Israeli military is under an obligation to issue a warning to those hospitals for Hamas to cease such activities, if they can be proven, of course. And as yet, we have found that the warnings issued to hospitals, including evacuation orders, have not met the threshold of international humanitarian law.
The South African government, then, I don't know if you've seen President Ramaphosa, who's currently on a state visit to Doha in Qatar, confirming that this country is among those who want to petition, basically, the International Criminal Court to look into potential war crimes committed by Israel in Gaza. I want to get your reaction to that, and whether there's also potential, perhaps, to say that it should be a two-pronged investigation looking at the actions of the IDF and indeed the actions of Hamas in Israel on October 7th.
Indeed, the International Criminal Court prosecutor has jurisdiction over the current hostilities between Israel and Palestinian armed groups that covers unlawful conduct by all parties. And the ICC's Rome Statute prohibits, as a war crime, intentionally directing attacks against medical units and transport. So Israeli and Palestinian officials should cooperate, we believe, with the Commission and with the ICC in their work. And this is something we fully support, and I think South Africa's leadership at a global level on this matter should be welcomed. We have called on the United States, the UK, Canada, Germany, and other countries that support Israel to suspend military assistance and arms sales to Israel, since we believe that there is a prima facie case that its forces continue to commit widespread and serious abuses amounting to war crimes against Palestinian civilians with impunity. I think the world leaders can learn from South Africa's example in this regard, and we think that the reference to the International Criminal Court is an absolutely helpful step in the right direction.
How would the ICC, though, realistically even begin to go about this process and hold anyone accountable? And if there is anyone to be held accountable, how do they do that when you look at the situation in Israel, where the government there says its position is morally just and what it's doing is in defense of its citizens and tourists who were attacked on October 7th? You've got Hamas saying its position is also righteous because it is defending Palestinians who've been under decades-old occupation. But where Hamas is concerned, the senior leaders, we're told, are not even in Gaza. So who do we hold before the ICC for accountability?
I think what's the benefit of the International Criminal Court process is that they apply a legal standard to both sides, or the multiple sides, I should say, involved in this conflict. And it's really up for the ICC to make those determinations about who should appear before it based on its jurisdiction. It seems that an investigation by the ICC, and we have noted that in the past when Russia attacked Ukraine, an ICC investigation was launched almost immediately, and it's taken a really long time for this process to kick in at the ICC. We recognize the limitations and the challenges of the ICC process, but we think that applying the full weight of the international criminal law process, including the application of international human rights and humanitarian law, is certainly the way to go. And therefore, the ICC's investigation of this matter, I think, would be a really, really helpful addition to trying to unravel the way in which the conflict is playing out, and particularly how it has affected civilians and people in Gaza who have absolutely nothing to do with the attacks of October 7th.
Kayum Ahmed from the Human Rights Watch organization, where he is Special Advisor on the issue of health. Thank you so much for your time tonight.